All right, we're now live. Just give it another 5 seconds and we're gonna kick off. All right, so welcome to this webinar today where we have Jeri and Faith from DBT and Petter from Sync. And we'll be talking more about how to think about building a testing strategy, how to test smarter and not harder. And it's something that the folks here today know a lot about. So Jeri and Faith wrote a 2-series article around how to test smarter, not harder. And we'll also be talking about that at the DBT conference. And Petter has been doing a lot of thought leadership around how to think about tests and also more recently how to use AI in testing. So just before we dive in, if each of you could just give a quick introduction of who you are and why you care about testing in the first place.
I'll jump in. I'm Jeri Kumala-Kenny, DBT Labs, and I'm one of the resident architects on the professional services team. So I get to see a lot of different DBT projects. I love testing because there's so much opportunity there to really think about the quality of your data, and not enough people are thinking about it strategically, right? Mm-hmm. There's no one blanket approach, and it means what I like about it is like you get to think about your data more creatively, and you really start thinking about what does good data mean for you and your business. And so I can talk about this topic all the time. So that's a little bit about me. Pass it to Faith.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Faith McKenna, also DBT Labs. I am a lead technical instructor on our training team. My job is sort of the inverse of Jeri's, where she gets to see customers on a really deep level in 3 to 4 month engagements, sometimes longer. I see a lot of customers in 2 to 3 week engagements. So I see wide industry patterns, and Jeri has extreme depth of expertise. And similar to Jeri, I think testing is a great opportunity to understand your data on a much deeper level. I also care a lot about the development of community standards in analytics, of course, being at DBT. And there are not really great community standards around testing yet. So it's fun to be able to explore this with Jeri and with the folks from Sync to sort of develop these standards as we go. Data is still the Wild West in a lot of ways, and we have an opportunity to sort of tame it just a little bit.
Perfect. I'll round it up. I'm Petter, founder and CEO of Sync. My background is in engineering for about 25 years almost. So I've been always building systems, and as part of that, I always felt the testing is kind of an integral part of it. And roughly about 10 years, I also blended my engineering career with data, and I've seen a lot of different teams. I had a privilege to manage some large technology organizations spanning engineering and data, and I saw the difference. And so that led me into starting a company to help solve that. And also that's why I'm very passionate about the topic. So very excited to dive deeper and see how we can move forward.
All right. And before we dive in, you've all helped data teams think a lot about what's good testing, what's not good testing. What do you think is one thing that people consistently get wrong when it comes to writing good tests? Maybe starting with you, Faith. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say repetitiveness. If there are data teams that aren't doing any testing at all, common thing to get wrong, but another common thing to get wrong is repeating yourself too much. Seems a little counterintuitive, given that in the data world, we're trying to move towards that dry principle. But we see a lot of things like testing primary keys on source systems and testing them again at your staging layer. Seems like a little thing, but repetitiveness in testing is a common anti-pattern that I see.
Yeah, I'm basically saying the same thing, but from a different angle, is not trusting that your tests are doing what they're supposed to do. So you want to test everything all the time. So if you're testing and you're testing really early in your pipeline, in your transformation pipeline, you should trust that it's doing what it's supposed to do. So you're not repeating the same kind of tests all through, right, your DAG. So I just see that people don't trust what someone else has done sometimes, or a test that's in place. And so a big piece is like, everyone should have a shared understanding of the why they're testing and how they're testing. And if that agreement is in place, I think it would help reduce those like repeated and redundant tests.
And I would say maybe I would add a little bit more philosophical angle at it, where I always felt that engineering means building reliable systems. Now we're talking about analytics engineering, so it means that we are building something what should perform in the edge cases and all the scenarios. And so to me, testing is the way to make it happen, because as an engineer, I will always make some mistakes, and it's always helpful to have the safety net to actually do that. And one thing which I still feel is happening more on the industry level, that I feel we still talk about testing too much as almost like the afterthought or the thing we don't want to be doing and we kind of have to do, versus I think when I saw the teams who build really reliable systems, they've adopted the mindset that testing is just like integral part of building. And so I think it's also helpful to kind of think of it from that perspective of how can we as an industry keep driving the advocate the testing and say, like, this is just part of building anything reliable, because without testing, there's just always going to be some failure, and almost like there's just isn't anyone smart enough, to get everything right in the all scenarios, especially in large teams as things get more complicated. So to me, it's almost like that mindset of making the tests it's just part of building models, it's part of building complex analytical systems. So I think that's to me like the most foundational thing we should be still talking about at Solving.
That makes sense. And one theme I often hear is data teams actually don't really know what good looks like or what a good testing strategy look like. So what's if you're in a data team, what are some signs that you are doing testing well, and on the other hand, what are signs that you're not doing testing well?
That's a good question. Yeah,
It's a really good question. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Okay, well, I'll start like with a few ideas. So again, I'm trying to think of it as almost like not just testing data, but testing in general. I think to me, the number one thing which is super important is that the testing is intentional. And so we made some decision and we articulated, this is how we want to test our systems. So I think that's first thing to almost see, like, is there some level of intentionality wherever, if it's what kind of tests we're using, what tools we're using, where are we putting these tests? Yeah. I think that's kind of one thing which comes to mind. And perhaps from the other side, if I was to kind of jump into a new team or company and see, like, how are they doing with testing? I think the first thing I would look at is where is the alerting channel and what happens there when the tests fail? Because way too many times it's either completely quiet and there is someone shouting at a company that something's wrong. It's probably a sign that something's not quite right. Or on the other hand, it's a wallpaper of alerts which feel repetitive and the same, which makes me think that something is not quite right with how the failures are being managed. And I would actually say that if something is wrong, it's way more likely almost like a cultural or operational problem than the tests themselves. So it's like, is there a culture of actually testing, and when things fail, how are we actually going to handle that? I think that's way more likely to be wrong than the tests being put in the wrong place as like the most kind of foundational thing. So definitely I would look at that alerting channel. That would be my first thing I would analyze.
Yeah, I love what you're getting at there, Peter, with what happens when a test goes wrong. So something, Jari, and I think a lot about, and some of that, like you said, comes down to the culture and also the documentation that you have around your testing, as well as a shared understanding of the why that Jari mentioned. Because if you don't understand those things, and how are you supposed to know what to do when a test fails? And to the two of us, if you don't know what to do when any kind of data test fails, it probably doesn't belong in your pipeline. And that's kind of an easy way to prune out extraneous testing, is when you don't actually know what to do when it fails, if it's just becoming part of the wallpaper in your alerts channel.
Yeah. And the other piece I would add, it's just built on what both of you said, is if no one owns, like, anything, right? Like, it's true. The first thing is like, do they have an alerting channel? Do people know what to do? Is there a process for actually remediating this if you do know what to do? But the big piece is like, who owns it, right? Is it something that, is it shared ownership? Are there clear steps? Like, that's the hard part. Sometimes people have no idea who's supposed to care about it.
Right.
And so it just continues. They're like, we have a run book, we have steps, but maybe you don't have like on-call rotations. Maybe you don't have like a process for it. So it's like there has to be some kind of discussion around who owns what, or is it part of a new process in your org? So yeah, I look at that. It's just like, you don't know who owns it. You don't know how to solve it. You don't know, what, all of these things tell you like, maybe you don't, testing is not resonating with your team in the way that you want it to resonate.
That makes sense. And yeah, so some of the themes there, tests not being acted on, Slack alerts being busy, no ownership, no prioritization. What, maybe zooming in on your articles here and Faith, what would you do if you came into a data team and were to recommend them kind of moving beyond this, just adding one more test, but more principally thinking about testing?
So I can tell you what the first thing I would say is like, let's, and people, the first thing I would say is audit your projects. Let's audit your tests and where you're testing and how you're testing and why. It's easy for me as coming in from the outside saying this. I think it's hard when people are also trying to like keep business as usual to do it. And so what I do is like, I start with the big picture. I'm like, this is what I would want you to do. If time is up to constraint, I think you need to think about your most critical assets, the ones that matter the most. And I think all of us here have like talked or written about it to some degree, right? Like what's the most important, your P1s, right? The most important pieces of your data, your project, and do that exercise with that, right? Yeah. Which is like, when you're testing, are you consistently testing across the board? What's this idea of like complete testing, data quality, like what triggers a real warning and how people respond, and doing that audit there and using that to guide their thinking. Like basically, it usually gives you a sense of the culture of the team. It gives you a sense of how things are documented, who owns what, and just like a little bit of a true pulse check. It forces the conversation of, oh, we've never had this conversation before, right? Or it's like, oh, this person thinks this and this person thinks that. So I always start with the audit. I'm like, if they're open to it and ready for it, no matter how small it is, an audit needs to take place.
Yeah. And building off of that, I would say after you have kind of completed this audit and understand what your shared ethos is around testing, almost knocked over my filter. I'd say like being okay with starting small and picking out just one of those P1 priorities that is probably going to be in your top layer of your pipeline. So some kind of MARTS model. Common examples are things like your revenue numbers, your monthly active users, if you're in SaaS, things that people look at every day, and things where if those numbers are wrong, the most amount of people's day is going to get ruined, or the most kind of big cheese in your company is going to get cheesed off at you. Those things where the consequences are high of the numbers being wrong, pick one of them and start with that one and understand the last time that number was wrong and why, and pick out a test that can help you guard against that. And picking just that one thing, assigning a data owner of it, so somebody who understands the complexities of the table itself, and then a business owner as well, who could help you understand why that number might be wrong from a business perspective, right? Because you can have numbers that are wrong because, oh no, some part of my SQL was written incorrectly and it didn't catch an edge case. Or your number could be wrong and not meeting your expectations for a valid reason that a business owner can help you understand. So I think just picking one P1 item to start with, assigning a technical owner and a business owner, and some kind of testing to it to guard against it not meeting your expectations is a bite-sized way to start. A lot of data teams are busy. Most people don't want to completely upend the way that they work and have like completely new processes. Like it's hard to adopt these things. So I think picking one part of your pipeline and just trying it out and proving success in that respect can help you shift your culture in the right direction.
I would maybe add like 2 points to this why I think this approach is so important, especially in data, where that's maybe one thing I see differently in software engineering and analytics engineering, is that in software engineering, almost everything is production all the time, which means that you kind of have to test everything. And if it's going to production in front of customers, it should be tested. And what I see in data ecosystems is that it's way more intertwined with, like, there's this exploratory analysis someone just did, there's this new model which we might maybe never have in production in the end, there is some very critical use cases, and it's all mixed and actually all lives in production. And so I think that's actually what I see a lot, is that it's just so overwhelming because there is so much, but actually the critical part is somewhere in the middle, somewhere hidden among all of the models. And so it's definitely super useful to work from the use case and work backwards through the data system. And the second point is that I think, especially when this is delivered on this first use case, I was always big advocate of driving change in larger organizations through almost like a case studies internally, where someone will do the job on one use case and then goes around and tells everyone like how well it's done and why it works and what was necessary, and almost like becomes the internal advocate. So it also creates almost this unit inside of a company of early believers who want to change, who will actually do it in their side of a company and then help you drive it across the larger teams. So definitely, like, there's also that aspect that it helps you kind of create these case studies.
There's something you said that I really, really like, Peter, and it's like around this idea that everything's in production in the data analytics realm. And it's a very different concept than in true software engineering, right? Like, or engineers in general, how they think about a product. And so a data product. And I think it's something that we should drill into some more when we're thinking about this testing, because exploration versus a data asset that has to be used for reporting or for very standard use are two different use cases, right? And two different risks level of how you think about when you expose that information. You don't have to test them in the same way. That the stuff that you're prototyping on or exploring on, and then you decide, hey, this is the standard for how we want to define this metric, or how we want to think about it, how we want to present it, then it has to have more rigidity. But anything that's already there should be really vigorously tested. But as data teams, I haven't seen enough discussion around that. Like, and like, as we think about another layer of filtering how we think about testing, but it would be pretty cool. I wonder if some teams are doing that when they're looking at their data assets. They're sitting back and they're like, hey, when we think about P1, we're really thinking about these very specific data assets in our project versus everything. But yeah, for me, it was the first time really thinking about it in that way. I'm just like, oh yeah, that's true. Even though it's a reality. Yeah.
I think I'd pick up on one word you said, which is risk, which I think that's basically what I think this is all about, in terms of what's the risk of MRR model, which is used by entire company, failing, versus what's the risk of analysis I'm doing for one of the product teams as exploration failing. And I think, again, it goes back to the initial assessment of what are use cases we're going to support, what is the risk level around them, and making a decision. And I've seen some teams who said, we don't want to get involved in production customer-facing analytics. We don't want to take that risk. I always say it's a bit of a shame. I think it's a challenge, I know, but I think we should go there and we should drive data to these critical use cases. But again, making that a very explicit discussion as on a strategy level, as a company data strategies, like, this is the use case where we want to go, which we're going to want to go for. It's new AI system, is it customer-facing systems? Great, but then with that comes some sort of risk management where we're going to actually test things well and make sure that they work.
If we take it and almost like go a bit deeper into the implementation, so one common theme that comes up is this idea of like different stages of phases in the pipeline, whether that's sources or marts or transformations. I don't know if one of you dare to almost pick a use case and then think about what could testing look like at different stages, and what are considerations to think about to make sure you don't replicate tests, and kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, so I think a common one in software is something like your weekly active users. In DBT, we talk a lot about weekly active projects and weekly active accounts. For something like that, you're probably going to expect that number to vary within a certain range. And that is what Yuri and I get at in both of our articles when we talk about business-focused anomalies. Because if you're expecting your weekly active users to vary between something like 10,000 and 11,000 users per month, you probably want to start with setting a accepted range alert at your MARTS level. And if your weekly active users are varying outside of that level, getting your test failure should trigger you looking deeper into your staging layer and into your source layer to figure out exactly why it's varying that much. Because that might be cause for celebration that you have an influx of new users, or it could be robots are making a bunch of new accounts and that's bad. Having a sense of why your data is varying in the way that it is should inform what you do after you actually set the test. So I think that's where I would start at the MARTS layer and you could do something like an accepted range for a common metric like that.
And that's maybe an important, before we move up to the transformation and sources, that's maybe an important thing to mention, that actually, as you said, a fluctuation doesn't necessarily mean there's an error, but that just means that something may have changed, which may be due to real things happening in the business, but it may also be something incorrect. And I think that's also maybe where the severity level, warn and error and so on, comes into play.
Yeah.
Right.
If we move one step up, so say we've done this kind of business anomalies, what would then be the transformation or staging layer and the sourcing layer? How would you think about testing at those two? And Yari, Petter, also feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I would almost say, so I'm going to jump all the way to the sources first, because let's do the bookends and see. I would say from the sources side, right, like you're thinking about using the monthly active users as an example, and how information comes in. You might have an idea of what complete data looks like for from the source system for a user or however that is coming in. And so that's when you start thinking also about uniqueness, right, around that, or not nulls, tests, right? Some very simple things that you can put in place around your sources of staging. But probably starting at source, if you know that should never be incomplete, then you should put that test there, because that means it shouldn't even get into the pipeline to begin with. And then this idea of like the freshness and structure of your data, you have all these different things you can start thinking about, right? But like freshness being like there is a regular cadence to how this information comes in. So you should flag when information is not coming consistently based on how you define freshness, the cadence of data flowing in, right? And then the other piece that I like to think about, depending on contracts and other elements of your project, is like the structure of your data should be consistent. Are there things that should never deviate, right? Unless you are redefining it somewhere else. You should start thinking about all those pieces there, because you already know what you're trying to solve for, which is exactly what Faith said, which you're like trying to catch that last piece before it gets there, right? But before you even get there, you try to filter for the cleanliness and completeness of your data coming in. And then that allows you to then go into the staging piece and end piece, where you start thinking about, all right, there's the light cleanup, and there might be things that because of how data comes in, even though it's complete from the different sources, you need to deduplicate stuff. You need to do some additional very light cleanup just based on the patterns of your data. It's not that the data is bad, it's how it's coming in, right? And you know it, you've addressed it, you've thought about it. And then you start thinking about those calculations and joins and bringing disparate information together. And you're thinking about this new level of granularity for a user, for a monthly active user. And then you're like, I need to make sure that when I say monthly active user, I mean one, it counts for that unique level of, and so you're redefining granularity, you're redefining how you're doing the calculations, maybe other elements that you're bringing in about that person that you're validating for. And that's what we talk a lot about in our post, which is like, this could be a range of things depending on how you're joining information and how you're defining your level of granularity. Now this comes like that engagement with a business user or stakeholder. You're like, we expect this pattern, right? Like when we're saying a monthly active user with these other dimensions that we have in place, these are the patterns that we expect. These are the ranges we expect. This is the relationship maybe we want to see with another existing asset in the project that should never deviate, right? And so so it filters down even more this idea of an individual active user based on maybe relationship. You're starting to test for relationships across the project, across data assets. You're starting to test for ranges. You're starting to test for very specific behaviors where it's like their first engagement with a specific asset has to happen before or after a registration, right? Like he starts defining these more nuanced kind of elements, and you're either baking it into your SQL, right, into your modeling, which should be standard, or if those patterns are already addressed in how data comes into your system, then you're testing for those outliers or anomalies that could be fixed and addressed. So some things should be done in your modeling, but some things where it's just like, you shouldn't be doing everything in the testing piece if you can model it accurately. But like things that are really unexpected behaviors based on how you know your data and how you've modeled your data, then they become those test layers based on how you're defining monthly active users, for example.
Right, because you're kind of guarding against those idiot checks, right? If you're expecting your monthly active users to be between 10 and 11,000 in any given month at your source level, better be making sure that your user IDs are actually unique.
Yeah.
If that's not in place, you could be easily overcounting because of duplicates. And in your staging or intermediate layer, you might want to be testing for things like variations in email addresses. You could have unique user IDs, but maybe it's Faith McKenna at Gmail is one user ID, and Faith McKenna 2 at Gmail is another user ID, where my user IDs might be unique, but the emails that I signed up under are not unique. So in your intermediate layer, testing for things like that is getting your idiot checks out of the way so that when your business anomaly test fails, you can go back through your pipeline and be like, okay, well, immediately I know it's not this uniqueness issue. It's not this email issue. Those are two things that could be causing us problems. But since we have solid testing and sources and staging, we can immediately get deeper and figure out what is the reason for our jump or drop in monthly active users that isn't, dang, I forgot to deduplicate. You want the answers to variations in your data to actually be interesting, ideally, and not somebody wasn't cleaning up the data properly.
Yeah, I think I really like this point where you almost say like the layout of testing is helping me accelerate how quickly I'm going to diagnose the issue. Yeah. And I always thought of it as like it's almost like we talk about testing the outputs and we testing the input, aka sources. And I always think of it that's a really good way to think about it, because then we're kind of boxing this thing in the middle. It's like, this is our data system. It has to produce something out and it's consuming something in. And I always think that's also how complex software is built. It's usually a lot of independent boxes which are doing their thing, and they each are very well tested. And so I really like this like mindset of let's test the boundaries of systems whenever things come in and then they come out. And so this MART and sources focus in the beginning to me is very natural. And of course, there are teams which are far beyond that, and they have layers of even teams and organizations. I think it just can replicate, but with more granular level. So there's some core analytics engineering teams who is producing 15 or 25 core models for the whole company, probably tests these models really well. And then someone builds on top of that. And then once things fail, it feels like we basically try to point where in the system is the failure by saying, well, this is failing, but this is not. So it's here. And I always think it's super useful if the testing is done on these technical, but also organizational boundaries in the company. Because I can see my sources tests are failing. I can go upstream and I can go find the team who stopped sending us data. It's not my system, right? It's not my SQL because I already know it's failing over here. So I think it's super useful to actually think of the boundary testing.
Perfect. I'll just mention here, there's a lot of details, and in the notes for the webinar, you can find the link to Jari and Faith's article about where in the pipeline the test should go, and also the guide that Petter has co-authored around how to think about these different stages. Shifting gear a little bit and shifting to AI specifically, this is still maybe the the frontier, but have you seen any ways already that data teams are using AI in practice to write better tests? Or maybe have you yourself played around with it or actually found some workflows that have helped?
That's a great question. I'll defer to you all, but I can't wait to see more projects and see how creative people are getting with this. But personally, I'm in the experimentation phase of just kind of like, can I use it as a thought partner, but not necessarily in any like standard or automated or like with tools, in a smart way yet.
Yeah, so far all I've seen is acceleration of documentation. So things like talking to AIs with voice mode about the docs that you want to spin up and having it get you a quick draft. But so interested to hear what y'all are thinking about and seeing too.
Yeah, maybe I can take it and gonna talk through the journey I've at least been on in the last, like, I would say 6 to 8 months, where I felt like it's all again rooted in the software engineering, where after many years engineering almost like by hand, without that much AI help, I was almost like shocked, to be fair, after seeing technology for so long, how quickly it changed. And so to me, like the change in software engineering itself, where there's just really large portions of software are now actually being built by AI, almost like guided by a human, which kind of changed the dynamic, that it's no longer me writing most of the code, but it's actually AI system I'm driving. I felt like it's just natural that this is going to trickle down to data analytics and data engineering teams, because we're also writing code. Mm-hmm. And so to me, like the earlier stages I've seen is that actually, DBT is very popular. So there is plenty of code online, which means that language models, of course, also understand DBT and the syntax and different considerations. So to me, that feels like, if nothing else, I would be experimenting with that workflow of whatever I'm using, DBT Cloud or other solutions which are more tailored for the analytics engineering, or even just using things like Cursor. I think it's already capable to be very good assistant on, hey, I just did this model, write some tests for me which cover this and this and this and that, and have probably the syntax level, and just making sure it finds the right names of the test from packages, so I no longer have to go to GitHub to check the right one. I think that is already solved problem. On top of that, I think I see this a lot in standard, like normal engineering, and I would apply it here, is that we write a lot of guidance for our system, for our agent, of, I want you to put these components over here. I want you to write code like that. API naming should look like that. And I think today you can already create your mini testing strategy like that, put it into your prompt in your Cursor, if that's let's say that's one of the most popular ones out there, and it would already be on the next level compared to let's say the freestyle version, where it's kind of just picking up general patterns. Mm-hmm. And I think seeing all that, it was, to me at least, increasingly obvious is that we can now take it to the next level and start building almost like purpose-built tooling, which helps teams write and deploy better tests. And I think this is where we are with Sync, and I think this is still very early stage on the market of like how to solve this best. But ultimately, how I see it is that we're pushing to the point that context about, let's say I'm building a model and I want to figure out what's the best tests I can deploy, instead of me working just off some sort of generic testing strategy, it's now completely feasible to feed a lot of metadata into that decision, right? So I can see where in the lineage I am. Are there any downstream use cases? Is there any P1 critical use case downstream? What's the structure of SQL I'm writing? Where is the data coming from? All of that information can be now most like readily compiled and provided to the large language model at that point when I said I want to write meaningful tests for this model. And so I think because of that, and because of like cost is being driven down, we can now feed more information in. It's becoming more and more powerful in a way that I think we're going to soon get to the territory where the the AI system can consider just so much context of where am I, what's going on. My colleague just did PR over here. This thing changed yesterday, which I can't anymore have in my head myself. That it sometimes will start to surprise me and say like, oh, this test I never thought of and I should have added. And so I think we're getting to that territory where we already see in some cases AI outperforming almost like my own thinking. But of course, there's always like a business context. I need to understand like what's happening and like what am I building this for? And I think there's still a lot of work to be done. But from that perspective, I already see AI is just so far. And again, we're like what 6-8 months into that, almost like agentic era and like a lot of like evolution, really fast evolution of the models, which are getting released every 2 or 3 months. There is something new and breakthrough that I almost like, I have no doubt that in a year it's going to just look completely different. Anyway.
Yeah, maybe add one thing, as you totally agree on the using cursor, metadata, all of that. One thing I found pretty useful as well was with the dbt MCP server, I was using Claude, and you could actually ask the agent to use real data. So query 1,000 sample rows from my database and use that to write a unit test that's realistic or come up with cases for verifying the format of a field. And it actually did that based on real data and real examples, which produce super powerful results.
Yeah. It is pretty cool. It's also overwhelming because, and I say this because it's like, if you're in it, you get the power of all these tools and systems and how to think about it. I think the challenge now, and you mentioned it, is taking a step back and aligning it with the why, the business, right? Because what's happening is our end users, some of them are not as enmeshed in all of these systems and approaches. They're using it in some way, right? But not in the same way that any engineer or data person is using it. And we can build so much so quickly, very, and customize, right, what we're building and how we're thinking about it for any use case. I almost feel now. You're like, someone comes to you, you're gonna be like, I can think about all the different angles we can vet for this moving forward and like standardize it, simplify it, right? I think the challenge is going to be reducing the noise, right? Like what is possible with what is needed, because all of us are like, we're prone, as builders, as developers, we're prone to like, we always can think of a solution to a problem and like build that solution. That's kind of what we're geared towards, I find. Anyway, I definitely approach it that way. I think the challenge is going to be us being able to slow some of this down and say what is actually necessary versus what is nice to have, because as these projects will keep scaling, now we're going to also start thinking about performance on a larger, like what does performance mean for a team? Like we have to start bringing in cost of like doing all these tests, these robust tests. So, very custom tests for different use cases, because what happens is when a team is small, it's great. And then it reaches a certain X point where you're like, some tests are going to run slower. Some of them are not necessary for an everyday production job. Maybe they're something that you do as a pulse check, right? Or some of them you only do for a very sliver, like a sample of your data at certain times. So those are the pieces where I think we're going to get there at some point with the tooling, but it's just like figuring out that like push and pull from like build to like build what makes sense for them right now.
I guess go for it.
Oh, it's okay. No, I'd also be super interested to see these AI systems that you're talking about being able to look through the data estate of teams that do have just an enormous amount of data and have applied a lot of testing coverage to help them prune it. I think the different stage testing approaches that Jari and I talk about and that we're really passionate about, it's easy to go pretty ham with those and apply a lot of testing, use things like Cursor or Claude or dbt Copilot, whatever, to auto-apply a lot of tests. And then the person who auto-applied a lot of those tests skedaddles to another job, and the people who remain forget why those tests are there or what they are for. I've used other AI systems to do something similar in my own like work tracking, so not quite the same as like a data estate, but I've asked them to do things like look through my different projects and recommend stale items for me to get rid of, to take off my plate, things I haven't touched in months that I have forgotten about. Do I actually need to pick those things back up again? Or could I just get rid of them to sort of prune out my own workload?
It's great. I'm smiling because I think second or third customer I demoed this feature, they're like, this is great. Can you help me remove tests? I have too many.
Yeah.
So there was like instant reaction.
You're way ahead of us.
Okay, yeah, that actually makes sense. And even now, when we kind of taking it to the next level of almost thinking of how can we recommend tests on the entire pipeline, we just had discussed it earlier today that the biggest challenge we have to solve is how not to overwhelm the user with add 274 tests and we're done here and you're well tested. So I think definitely this whole, I always think of it as like it's best to have the least amount of tests which you need to reduce the risk in the end. And so I think the objective of AI system shouldn't be to add tests, but it should be to remove risk. So where is the, let's say, the rest of the risk you see based on the coverage of tests you already see? And to your point of the complicated pipelines, I think it's TBD, but I have an opinion on this where actually if you look at metadata, which are under the hood of even our system, there is a lot of knowledge of layout of these tests. And so I always think of it as it's all about packaging it in the right way as a context to that prompt where I will say, let's prune this pipeline. Here is a schema of the test which is already in place. And I think once you nail that, it actually can be done where even large systems can then be almost like step-by-step pruned. So, and to your point, right? I see 4 models in the DAG next to each other, each one uniqueness, not no test on the same column. There's no meaningful transformation. I think I can prune some of that already. So I think to me that this is the new voodoo. Like back then in ML, it was all about parameter tuning. Now it's all around like, how do I shape the context in the best way possible to the model, which is available to me today to do the right decision. And I think that's the kind of next big challenge to solve for a tool like us or for you guys in DBT Labs to help with the transformations.
Well, this is why I'm so excited for Coalesce, partly because we're preparing for it right now, and so I have it on the brain. But I'm excited to be able to get people in the same room who are from different ends of the spectrum, because Jiri and I truly see both ends of the spectrum, where one end is no testing at all, haven't done it ever, and the other end is, like you said, Petter, I'm testing uniqueness on the same 4 subsequent models in the DAG for no reason. So I think we can kind of cool each other's temperatures across the industry when we get everybody in the same room, and this is definitely part of it.
Yeah.
I guess like one thought I would add to this is, or that's my hope with this whole AI-driven testing, is that the last year where you guys published articles, I published some articles, it was always like a reading material. People read it and say like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I should be doing that. Right. But then it's like one person out of 20 on a team, and there's another group of people who maybe are not that passionate about testing. So what I hope is that we hopefully will manage to productize these articles to a software which will then sit there next to a person as they're writing a model and say, oh, by the way, based on your strategy you define in your company, here is how you should be testing the model. Do you want me to apply the tests for you? Almost like as a means to action it, because otherwise, as much as there could be great presentation done to the team to explain why is it important, I always love to kind of remove the friction. And I think we might have the right tools in the toolbox to get a lot of friction away and hopefully see more of that done much better. So I'll see.
I like it, especially across layers. You're in your intermediate layer. You should, should you read this test?
Based on what you told me.
Already tested. Yeah.
Perfect. I think we are on time. Maybe just worth mentioning before we round off. So we're all going to be at Coalesce in Las Vegas. Yari and Faith, you'll do a work session on testing smarter, not harder, which I think will be streamed online as well.
Not the peer exchanges, because
Okay.
because people are working through it, but the other sessions, yeah.
Okay, and Petter, you'll do a talk more focused on AI and everything around data reliability on that, which should be streamed online.
Definitely. I might show a bit of what I was talking about today. I think we have one question from Wojciech as well. I don't know if you want to address that before we finish.
Yeah, definitely. Bring it up here.
Okay, I'll start, and I think it's kind of connected to my last point, which is what I would want to see is that the central team, or some of the most passionate people about testing and those who have knowledge of how the testing should be done, will be the ones who define the strategy for the AI system, and hopefully that AI system will be deployed as things are being built in the periphery, and will be not like a little nudge and helper to say like, hey, by the way, you've defined, this way of testing. So how about I help you deploy it? So I hope, again, like I see AI as a mean to deploy the best practice in a way which removes the friction, which hopefully will help with this use case as well.
Perfect. And just to round off, if people want to learn more about you or any specific content you've written before Coalesce, any places they should go?
LinkedIn's the spot.
Exactly. That's like LinkedIn and the DBT blog. I know that Mikhail, you put some links. Those are two that we've written. More to come, hopefully. We're always thinking about testing. And then just Coalesce, for sure.
Same for me. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to share some rants about testing, and otherwise, see you all hopefully at Coalesce.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.